Bas Rutten is not just one of the pioneers of the sport, but he belongs among the greatest champions in history, who at one point in his career managed to compile an unbeaten streak of 20 fights in a 3-year time span, win titles in Pancrase and the UFC, and retire like a boss while on top of the game. For many fight fans out there, Rutten is probably a perfect mixture of a captivating personality, outstanding fighting skills, and a sense of humor which makes him one of the greatest characters in sports history. A vicious fighter who has left nothing but carnage whenever he stepped into the ring to compete. A comedian that would shut your lights out in a blink of an eye, or, more painfully, drop you with the famous shot to the liver with a huge smile on his face. Born as a fighter might sound cliche, as you can hear this phrase in just about all fighter videos, but it accurately describes Rutten's childhood, as he found himself fighting against eczema and severe asthma at the age of 6, which stopped him from engaging in any intense physical activity. Not even soccer, which is the #1 sport in Holland. Apart from health issues, bullying was also a big concern among his parents, as other kids often mocked him for wearing long sleeves and gloves to protect his hands from inflammation. And, in his own words, he would often climb the trees and jump between the treetops to escape from trouble. And although he showed an interest in martial arts early, often boxing in the school backyard with his friends, fighting was a huge no-no in his household, and he was forced to find alternative ways of dealing with physical abuse, often accumulating anger inside of him. Going against the will of his conservative parents, Rutten would eventually enroll in Taekwondo at the age of 14, and then unleash the anger he kept inside for so long by making a list of people that bullied him and beat them up one by one. Although the revenge was probably as sweet as honey, this terrible decision also put his martial arts journey on hold for the next couple of years. However, Rutten would get back into training as soon as he left the house at the age of 21, and besides Taekwondo, pick up Kyokushin Karate, where he also managed to obtain a black belt. Like most Taekwondo and karate practitioners in Holland, he transitioned over to kickboxing, which besides soccer is the most popular sport among Dutch people. But the early 90s were also a time when MMA started to rise, especially in Japan, where freestyle combat was already an established sport. And Rutten made a decision to give it a go, despite the rules favoring grapplers and him being a striker. In 1993, the bosses of Pancrase Promotion and famous pro wrestlers Mitsuko Funaki and Minoru Suzuki were in search of new talent to expand their roster. They traveled to Holland to find skilled strikers, and Rutten perfectly fit their profile. He was young, jacked up, good-looking, charming, and above all, a very exciting fighter. What's always been fascinating about his career is how busy Rutten was back in the day. If you look at his career in Pancrase between 1993 and 1998, he fought an amazing 30 times in 5 years, or 6 times a year on average. In a 3-year time span between September 1993 and October 1996, he stepped into the ring an astonishing 24 times, or 8 times per year on average, which is crazy by modern standards. And he wasn't a journeyman fighting for a paycheck, no. Rutten was a champion, and all of these matches were against the best fighters of that era. Stop for a moment and imagine a modern-day UFC champion or contender fighting that often. During the early stages of his career, Rutten banked on the Dutch school of striking to quickly finish his opponents with the aggressive offensive approach, which worked well because the majority of his opponents were pure grapplers, and their striking was nowhere near his level. Inside the ring, he would fool his opponent with his relaxed stance before starting to unleash a barrage of powerful push and roundhouse kicks and catch them with hard palm strikes to the head and body. Body shots in particular was a technique Rutten excelled in, as he had an amazing ability to target the opponent's liver with kicks and punches and finish the fight. The most memorable body shot he landed was the one against the legendary Minoru Suzuki in 1994. But the other thing that always stood up in his game was his incredible fighting IQ, adaptable fighting style, and the ability to learn quickly. If you isolate his first 3 years in Pancrase, you can clearly see how he completely changed as a fighter in that time span. Though he was an exceptional striker, Rutten's game got exposed in his third fight against Funaki, and later Ken Shamrock, who both out-grappled him. He realized that in order to succeed and become a champion, he would need to focus solely on the grappling aspect, especially on takedown and submission defense. And bear in mind that this was long before the state-of-the-art MMA facilities we have today. In fact, there were no gyms where you could learn how to mix different styles together. Following his loss against Shamrock, Bas didn't just improve his defensive grappling game. He actually started mixing his striking with wrestling attacks, and he was quite successful. The same stands for the ground game, where he was focused on developing a dangerous submission arsenal, primarily focusing on leg locks and chokeholds. His game got so good that in 1996, probably the best year of his career, he managed to compile a 7-fight winning streak, out of which 6 were submissions against high-level grapplers, such as Minoru Suzuki, and win the King of Pancrase title in the process. All of these improvements made Rutten an all-around fighter in an era where the one-dimensional approach was still a way to go, and probably technically the most advanced fighter of the 90s, which is clearly confirmed by his performances. On one side, he would beat world-class strikers such as the kickboxing champion and former UFC champ Maurice Smith, and on the other, wrestle and submit the best grapplers. He was indeed a mystery in Japan. In 1998, Rutten decided to leave Pancrase while being on an amazing 19-fight winning streak and enjoying God status in Japan, where he was a megastar. The next stop, the rapidly rising Ultimate Fighting Championship in the United States, where he arrived with a ton of hype, which was not a surprise considering he was probably the best MMA fighter at the time. In his UFC debut, Rutten faced Tsuyoshi Kosaka at UFC 18 in 1999 in a match where the Japanese wrestler managed to control the Dutchman with grappling for the majority of the match, with the Dutchman having a hard time finding a way back to his fight. Exhausted and beaten, Rutten was able to find a last bit of strength to close the show with a bunch of punches and knees, and pull the late KO finish. A few months later in May, he would fight for the UFC heavyweight title against another explosive wrestler, Kevin Randleman. And this match remains one of the most controversial in sports history. Randleman landed a total of 6 takedowns, and he spent the majority of the fight on top, but not without receiving damage from the bottom position, which in the judges' eyes was enough to give a decision to Rutten and cause huge controversy. However, his career was cut short while he was at the peak of his fame, and at the age of 35, still in his athletic prime as a heavyweight, due to multiple knee and neck injuries he suffered in 1999. After retiring from the sport while being on top of the game and UFC champion, Rutten wisely used his fame, charming personality, and incredible sense of humor to first enter the movie business, where he got a couple of small roles, before switching to the color commentator role for the English production of Pride FC events in Japan. He also competed in pro wrestling during the early 2000s. When it's all said and done, it's fair to say that Rutten had a career every athlete dreams about. Although his path was full of ups and downs, injuries, losses, and incredible victories, he remains one of the very few fighters who have retired while being at the top, and in Rutten's case, as a champion in 2 premier MMA promotions while on the 21-fight unbeaten streak. And more importantly, he managed to find different interests outside of fighting and navigate his road to success in these fields to live a peaceful life and provide for his family. A truly remarkable achievement.